Often people say that INFJs or NI dominance in general would make good psychotherapists or good analysts because they're good listeners and because they're compassionate and they're empathic and they're patient and they see over the long term and so on and so on. It's not that saying this is false in itself, right? It is true that on average you can expect compassionate attitude and empathic interaction from an INFJ, of course. A vision that is rather long-term, which in the case of a number of therapies is relevant. I mean, it's also worth pointing out that it's not always relevant, and therefore that certain types of psychotherapy, I'm thinking particularly of cognitive behavioral therapy, CBT, but other forms of therapy as well, maybe involving hypnosis, and there's other ones. In fact, maybe those are not the most suited to INFJs precisely because they are intended to be more short-term. And a lot of people these days, this is also in keeping with the zeitgeist, this is in keeping with what our societies identify with in terms of getting immediate results, wanting to be satisfied and gratified straight away. This is not a very long-term approach. And this may, in fact, not be what is ideally suited to the motivation, aspiration, and existential constitution of an NI dominant. So, when I think about it, saying that INFJs and INTJs would make great psychologists or great psychotherapists, yeah, but not necessarily across the board, not necessarily universally. You have to specify that you're talking about a kind of therapy, in most cases, that we would describe, broadly speaking, as psychodynamic psychotherapy. Now, psychodynamic is a very trendy term these days. Everyone uses it. Often, I think, by opposition to cognitive psychotherapy or CBT psychotherapy. As far as I understand, psychodynamic psychotherapy just means psychotherapy that's influenced by psychoanalysis, that has its roots in psychoanalysis, whether Jungian, Freudian, Lacanian, or a mix of these different approaches, because often analysts mix. I think that this is what I will do as an analyst when I start practicing. But psychodynamic psychotherapy is not analysis specifically, because obviously psychoanalysis has its own particular parameters and uses particular types of techniques that a psychotherapist, even a psychodynamically influenced one, may not use. So, for example, psychoanalysts who practice actual psychoanalysis as opposed to psychodynamic psychotherapy will tend to speak less, sometimes speak hardly at all. They will seek to uncover the defense mechanisms and the resistances of their clients, whereas in the case of a more traditional psychotherapist, so to speak, there will be more of a back and forth and more focus on the content of what you're saying versus the structure of what you're saying, what might be the linguistic giveaways of particular resistances and particular repressions, and trying to make you feel the feelings that were dissociated, basically, were isolated because your psyche was trying to protect you in the course of trauma, for example. What we know that people have a tendency to reenact their traumas precisely because the emotion itself, right, was never really felt. And analysts will try to do that, of course, over a long period. That's another difference. Analysis is the most long-term of all the therapies, but you can have psychodynamically informed psychotherapy that's long-term as well. So whether you prefer practicing as a psychotherapist that's analytically inclined and informed, or as an actual psychoanalyst, will depend on the particular kind of NI dominant you are. But I do think that these two approaches are if you like, the royal carpets to an I-dominant career in many ways. And I should also mention that more and more, and as you know, it becomes harder to afford such therapies because the world is going in the direction that it is going. More and more therapists or trained analysts practice both, depending on what the client is looking for. Which is also why it tends to be, I think, an advantage to study to go the full course and actually train as a psychoanalyst. Because then you can decide whether to practice as an analyst or as a psychotherapist or as both, depending on what the client's looking for. If you don't train in analysis but only in psychotherapy, then you can only practice psychotherapy. But that can be a very worthwhile goal as well, of course, don't get me wrong. Now, I did want to mention that in relation to the strengths of NI dominance and INFJs, in relation to such kinds of therapy, beyond the idea of empathy and compassion and being a good listener and seeing it over the long term, which might not be exclusive to NI dominance. It's not all NI dominance see over the long term. Not all NI dominants are compassionate, empathic, and good listeners. What might be specific to NI dominance, right, is what in French we call attention flottante. What I call NI drifting, and what I just discovered that Freud, I think, intuitively refers to as evenly divided attention. That is to say that when you interact with an INFJ, and this might be an INTJ, and this might be at times disorienting to another person, is the sense that the NI dominant is intensely engaging with what you're saying. In some ways, some people might say, and this is referring back to a video I released recently, too intensely, the peculiar kind of intensity of NI dominance, and at the same time, when it comes to certain other aspects of what you're saying, maybe listening with not enough intensity or drifting away, right? We're back to the oceanic mode of interaction, an expression of the NI world in external reality, dynamic interaction with other people via the FE function, but of course always imbued with a lot of NI. There's oceanic ham and then there's a wave, oceanic ham and then there's a wave. Those are the moments of intense focus. But they are fluctuating with moments of lesser focus. It's not as if the NI dominant is constantly looking at you like this. If you're talking to them for 15 minutes, you can be sure there will be intensity and then retreat, and then intensity and then retreat, and it's gentle, and it's, if you allow yourself to dance with it, it can be very deep and really profound and very satisfying, but you have to allow yourself to dance with it. It's an NI style. It's the style of the analyst, you see. The psychoanalysts, the evenly divided attention is like this. Paying attention to what is particularly important to the analyst requires having more of a floating focus, attention flottante, floating focus on what maybe might not be as crucial. And the NI dominant does this for a living, which is why they are ideally suited to becoming analysts. Because in a way, this skill, which they will have to develop as well, is in a rough and ready manner, in a raw fashion, ingrained in them, ingrained in us. Floating attention. The oceanic calm and then the waves, and then the calm again and then the waves. Focus on what's important. Drifting whenever what's said is less central. It's a gift of INFJs and INTJs. Potentially a psychoanalytical gift, or a psychotherapeutic gift of the psychodynamic variety. By the way, guys, if you enjoyed this video, give me a like. Don't forget, I've written 2 books on one NI dominant called the INFJ, the latest one being the Infinite Soul INFJ Life in Modern World, which looks at how INFJs can navigate a world they often find hostile, our world, in a way that leads to a life of satisfaction, meaning, meaningfulness, productiveness, and purpose. So if you want to check out the book, the first link below will lead you right to the page. You can check the review, see if you might like it. And as well, the Ecstatic Soul, a new look at the INFJ personality, which is the prequel and the deepest investigation into the mind of an INFJ. What's it like to be an INFJ? What's it like to think like an INFJ? Want to know more? Check the link below. And guys, just to conclude, don't forget that I could not do this without you. I rely on your very kind donations to my channel. There's a Patreon page that you can check below if you'd like to support my work. It's not expensive, and you get some really cool perks like access to our exclusive Discord server and bonus videos every 2-3 weeks from me on a topic of your choosing. So if that's of interest, check the link, and I see you soon. Bye-bye.